Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
A boy about 10 years old was sitting on a bench in front of the entrance of an old house. His back was straight. It was as if there was an evil warden behind him who would hit him with a ruler at the slightest relaxation. The boy had his palms tucked under his feet. He hardly moved at all. Only his eyes gave him away as a living person. The boy blinked constantly, as if trying to hold back tears, and he kept glancing at the door, even though no one was there. "Christopher, why are you frowning?" Sebastian turned his head sharply. It was their neighbor, Uncle David, a good man but lonely. He had no wife, no family, no children, no parents. And he treated Sebastian very kindly, often told him something interesting when they met in the yard. There was a time when Uncle David tried to get together with his grandmother, but she quickly sewed him up. So, what did the old fool come up with? "I've got nothing better to do in my old age than to do that sort of thing. I have someone I have to pay attention to. That's my grandson, and that's all I need," Grandma said then. "Sebastian, can you hear me?" Repeated Uncle David. "I can hear you," quietly answered the boy. "So what happened?" Sebastian sighed and answered even more quietly. "Grandma is not well at all. She has to go to the hospital, and they're taking me to the orphanage until she gets better and she comes home." Uncle David grunted uncertainly and ran his hand through the sparse hair on his head. There was genuine regret on his face. Boy, it's sad, but don't worry, everything will be all right. Grandma will get better and you'll be home soon. Just be patient, it'll all work out." He patted Sebastian on the shoulder, but the boy didn't even react. He was afraid. He was very afraid. It was the same with his parents. They were in a car accident. They were taken to the hospital and never came back. From that moment on, the hospital was something Sebastian dreaded, a place from which he never returned. Sebastian was afraid that Grandma would not come back either. But he did not tell Uncle David about his fears. Why tell him if the grown-ups don't understand? They'll start comforting, reassuring, but no one will understand how he feels. "Christopher, come home." Sebastian woke up and looked at the second-floor window. His grandmother was calling for him. So it would be over now. Now he would be taken away. His shoulders slumped against Kevin's. He looked sadly at Uncle David and said, "Goodbye, Uncle David." The man frowned. "See you soon, Sebastian. I'll miss you. Come back soon. Both Grandma and you." Sebastian nodded and walked dejectedly toward the entrance. He felt that there would be no meeting soon. He felt that very soon his life was going to be in the black. He knew it. As he reached the entryway, he glanced to the side. Sebastian saw an old vagrant who was often Kalacha near the house. He must have lived somewhere nearby. He was scruffily dressed, and he was always rummaging through the garbage cans, looking for something interesting and probably edible. Sebastian glanced at the tramp. A slight smile appeared on his face as he pulled out his hand and opened his palm. There was some change in the palm. Sebastian eyed the change for a while and then made a decision. He ran up to the hobo who was about to begin his search in the trash can and handed him the money with the words, "Take it." "Will you need it?" The man looked at the boy perplexed and then stared at the money. He held out his palm, and Sebastian poured the change into it. Then the boy ran home. He no longer heard the tramp say quietly after him, "Thank God to reward you for your generosity and kindness, and so it shall be, he will." "Sebastian, are we still on for today?" Sebastian looked at his friend. "By God, John won't leave him until he agrees. He always gets his way." "Well, all we have to do is give in to him. Otherwise, he won't leave him alone." Okay, in force I'll come. Just get off my back," Sebastian replied. John smiled. "That's another thing. Otherwise, I don't know, I can't. No time, maybe. Probably odd. What's the point of being so rich and not having a vacation?" Sebastian grinned. "Did it ever occur to you that the reason I'm so rich is because I work a lot and don't rest enough?" John shook it off. "I don't need to be rich. I'd rather have fun than save my 1 million in the bank. You don't even spend any money. Why are you so serious? We should always have fun while we're still young. You're only 26 years old and you already have tons of money. Then use it, or it'll be too late. You wake up and you're 60 years old. What's wrong with having fun with the girls? A bunch of diseases in the anamnesis, scrapes and joints, and not bent back. That's at best. And at worst, you'll just be lying in the cemetery in expensive coffins with gold handles that you won't give a shit about. Is that how you want it to be? Sebastian wrinkled his fucking nose. You painted it like that. It made me want to puke. John, leave me alone. I said I'd come, so I'll come. All of it. I need to finish my report. John laughed, but didn't bother his friend again until the evening. He waved his hand and walked out of Sebastian's office. Sebastian was engrossed in his laptop for another 10 minutes, and then he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes with his hands. He sighed and turned his chair around. Now he was sitting with his back to the desk and his face to the huge panoramic window. It was gorgeous. He still marveled at the view every time. It seemed to him that being so high up, he could see the whole world. A sadness appeared in Sebastian's eyes. He had already remembered his past several times today, and now the memories came over him again. He knew why this was happening. The day of his grandmother's death was approaching, and every year a few weeks before that date, he began to remember his grandmother's death, hitting him harder than the death of his parents. Of course, because his parents died when he was almost 5 years old. He stayed with his grandmother and she replaced them, but no one could replace her. Grandma never came out of the hospital. Sebastian's premonition did not deceive him. He went to the orphanage temporarily, but stayed there forever. In the hospital, his grandmother had a heart attack and died. The boy took her death very hard. The staff at the orphanage had never seen anyone get so carried away. No, he was not hysterical, did not cry, did not scream out of him, as if all his strength had been drained out of him at once. They spoon-fed him, even put him on IVs. He almost died. And then he had a dream about his grandmother. She begged him to come to his senses and told him that if he tried his best, he would get everything he wanted in life. And Sebastian came to his senses, and he tried. The staff of the orphanage breathed a sigh of relief. They felt very sorry for him. But he had to accept that life can sometimes be very hard to get ahead in life. At the orphanage, Sebastian met John. The boy had parents, but they were deprived of parental rights because they drank. John was an optimist in life. He never got discouraged and looked at everything through rose-colored glasses. He and Sebastian were complete opposites. Many people were surprised that they became best friends. Sebastian knew that no one could help him make his way in life. It was up to him to make himself successful. He studied on excellent, and after school, to everyone's surprise, entered the university. After graduating with honors, Sebastian set himself the goal of opening his own design studio. He planned to design apartments, houses, and furniture. Risking everything, he sold his grandmother's apartment, which miraculously remained at his disposal. All the money he invested in opening his own business, and he succeeded. Already in a year, he already had a considerable staff. He closed all his debts, and 2 years later, he earned his first $1 million. And his business has been successful and prosperous ever since. When he was starting his business, he met Robert. Robert worked with all kinds of programs. He had a sharp mind and smarts. They started working together. He became Sebastian's right-hand man and his close friend. Robert and John, to Sebastian's surprise, also found common ground. Robert was a serious man, but in normal life he could relax and have fun. That was what brought him and John together. It was hard to get Sebastian to go to a party or a bachelor party. And when John could not do it, Robert usually could not withstand the onslaught of two attackers Sebastian could not. And he almost always gave up. With sadness, Sebastian thought that if it were not for his loyal and faithful friends, he would be completely buried in work and did not see the white light. Robert and John must have been sent to him from above. Sebastian sighed and looked at his watch. He had to hurry or he wouldn't have time to get home and change. He also wanted to run to the park before the party. No sooner had Sebastian gotten up from his chair than there was a knock on the office door. "Yes, come in." The door opened and a young girl entered the office. When Sebastian saw her, he brightened up. "Kathy, how nice to see you. I've been thinking about calling you for a long time. It's been a month and you still haven't called." Well, Sebastian scrutinized the girl's face, trying to read her emotions. Kathy smiled shyly and tears appeared in her eyes. She nodded and said quietly, "It's okay, Sebastian." Everything had gone well. They said she was going to be okay. "Thank you. I don't know how I can thank you. I just don't know what I would do without you. Thank you." At the last words, Kathy wanted to kneel down, but Sebastian jumped up and started cursing at her. "What are you making up? Stop it so it never happens again. I'm happy for you. Now forget it all and just get on with your work." Everything ended well. Just think about your daughter. Forget I had anything to do with it. All right, go home. Monday, hopefully, she'll start work. All right, go, don't piss me off. Kathy smiled shyly and said, "I'll never forget it." "You know I'll never forget that you had something to do with it, and don't even ask me to forget. I will remember it for the rest of my life." Sebastian didn't have time to say anything because she immediately walked out of the office and closed the door behind her. Sebastian had been helping people in need since he was a child. He always wanted to relieve someone who was sick or not powerful. To help someone who needed help, he often helped homeless bums and disabled people, even alcoholics. And everyone idolized him. Kathy, he helped too. A girl came to work for him 2 years ago. She just finished school, hadn't even entered the institute yet. And she had a little girl on her hands. Everyone thought Sebastian was crazy to hire her. But Kathy was very talented, and Sebastian realized that right away. She was very good at drawing. And Sebastian needed someone like that. 6 months ago, he noticed that Kathy had become strange. She sometimes didn't hear when someone asked her a question. She stopped wearing makeup, often cried. Sebastian called her into his office and set her straight, where she would tell him what was wrong with her or he would fire her. And Kathy burst into tears. It turns out her daughter is seriously ill and needs expensive treatment. She can be put back on her feet, but only if treated now. If it's not treated, there could be complications later. So Sebastian paid for Kathy's daughter's treatment. She begged him not to, but Sebastian did it his way. After 2 months, Kathy finally told him the good news. Sebastian did good deeds out of the goodness of his heart. He couldn't help himself when he saw someone asking for help, or even not asking for help. That's just the way he was. And though his friends laughed at his quirks, they believed that he was the noblest and kindest man they had ever met. Sebastian arrived home, changed into more appropriate clothes for the party. He looked at his watch. If he went by car, he would not drink alcohol. But he would have time to drive past the park. And for some reason, he really wanted to go there tonight. It was like an unknown force was pulling him there. And so he did. There was a fast food stand in front of the park entrance. Sebastian ordered 4 shawarmas while they were being prepared at another stall. He bought a whole bag of sweet rolls and 10 bottles of mineral water. 20 minutes later, Sebastian was walking through the park holding the bags of food. He walked quickly, turning at the right places. He knew where he was going because he was there almost every week. After 5 minutes, he came out, on the other side of the park. There was a small grove here, and next to it was the city hospital. And it was also a warm place. And it was the homeless people's favorite place. Sebastian had found this place a couple years ago, and he had met a lot of homeless people here who couldn't find a sheltered and warm place to live. They didn't have a home of their own, but they found their shelter here under the warm pipes. From that time on, Sebastian looked after them. At first, he tried to give them money, even offered to help them, but they refused help, and the money was just getting through. And Sebastian realized that he could not guide them to the right path. He could just make their lives easier, feeding them and helping them when needed with money. After so long, the homeless were no longer afraid of him, and they respected him and never asked for more. They thought they could earn money by begging. But taking money for nothing from a man who does them so much good, that's not fair. They only asked for help when they really needed something substantial. Sometimes it was a boiling pot, or matches, or cough pills, or blankets and pillows. Last winter, several people asked for warm blankets. Sebastian bought them 20 of them. Someone asked for an iron mug. Sebastian bought everyone a set of utensils they needed. Someone needed a flashlight. Sebastian provided pocket flashlights and batteries. The guy was not stingy, and the homeless people adored and idolized him. The first person Sebastian saw was Stephen. This man, you could say, was the most important among all. He had the authority of everyone because he did not fall to the level of an animal living on the streets. He didn't let the others do it either. So what? So you live on the streets. It doesn't make you less of a human being. We need to break stereotypes. We need to show by example that we are human beings, not trash. It was Stephen Sebastian who offered to help. But apparently Stephen had some personal tragedy that prevented him from returning to a normal way of life. He listened attentively to Sebastian and then culturally responded. Your kindness touches me very much, and it makes me very happy that such people exist in the world. Thank you for keeping my faith, but I must refuse everything you offer me. I don't need it. I've chosen the path I'm going to continue on willingly. I think that's pretty much what everyone else will tell you. The literate speech of the homeless man made Sebastian realize that behind the shell of a dirty ragamuffin, there was a well-educated man who might have once also worn a suit. All the others also refused such serious help. So Sebastian gave up and just helped them with little things. He bought them food, clothes, medicine, water. Our Christopher came. Stephen was glad when he saw him. The rest of the group pouted and started to get closer. Sebastian, did you bring me a book? It was Mason. He was younger than Stephen, but he looked so battered. Sebastian shook his head. No, Mason didn't bring it today. I'll bring it in 3 days. I placed the order. There'll be a delivery in 2 days and I'll bring it to you then. Thank you, Sebastian replied sadly, Mason. Sebastian, we are happy to see you. It was the gray man who shouted. He got up rather reluctantly from his scholarly, blanketed form and walked closer. Sebastian saw that he had a black eye again. Gray, did you get caught with someone again? Why are you being so aggressive? Sebastian said reproachfully, but kindly he didn't sleep on my blanket. As soon as I was away for an hour on business, the legless one was right there. The main thing is that he hides his blankets or loses them and takes up other people's blankets. He may be a fool, but he fights. Laughing well, said Sebastian Gray a little offended. Dan, that's not true. I don't care if he fights, but I can run fast. Everyone laughed. Sebastian handed out treats and water bottles. All with sincere smiles thanked him, but did not leave him and said among themselves that there would be more such kind people as Sebastian. Sebastian wanted to leave. Then he noticed a strange figure nearby. He thought it was a skinny teenager, but when he looked closer, he realized it was a girl. She had long hair, which she had pulled up in a sloppy and messy bun. It was obvious that she was very dirty, and it was impossible to accurately determine her age. She didn't talk to anyone, and she didn't get any treats. She didn't touch anyone, and no one paid any attention to her. Sebastian had never seen her here before. For some reason, she interested him, and he could not understand why Sebastian approached Stephen. He was eating a sweet bun with appetite. Stephen, you have a new girl. I haven't seen her before, I don't think. Stephen looked at the girl and waved his hand. Yeah, kind of. She's new. She's just recently made her way to us. Came by at first, sometimes sat nearby and watched. Got closer each time. Sebastian frowned. Who is she? What's her name? Stephen shrugged. Who the hell knows? She doesn't talk. She's not mine. We came up to her anyway, thinking she was crazy or didn't understand why. And then we realized that a mute can't talk. We thought she was deaf, but no, she can hear. She is strange. Sebastian said thoughtfully, looking at the homeless man. Yeah, there's a little one who had his eye on her. Tried to take her hand. So she almost died of fear and started mooing and crying so much. It's bitter that he doesn't come near her anymore and doesn't even look at her. We call her Snow White, and everyone already knows that it is not allowed to touch her at all. I don't know what happened to her. All I know is that when she was in jail, it fell out of her pocket. A piece of paper fell out. I picked it up. I wanted to read it. I didn't see her name, but I managed to read that it was a release certificate, which Sebastian asked perplexed. She's an ex-con. She was in prison. I don't know why. You can't get anything out of her. And she grabbed the paper from me fast. I thought it was like a cat scratching me. Anyway, we don't touch her, but we don't chase her away. She just hangs around us. Maybe she feels safe that way. Sebastian once again looked at the girl Snow White. Barely audible, he whispered, and then the girl met his eyes, and Sebastian felt goosebumps run down his back. She had such a piercing gaze, her blue eyes penetrating his soul. She realized that Sebastian was looking at her with interest. She immediately turned away, and a moment later she stood up and walked swiftly away. She's afraid of outsiders. You're a stranger to her, Stephen said. Sebastian sighed and tried to put thoughts of this girl out of his mind. He said goodbye to Stephen and left. Naturally, he was late for the party. When John indignantly asked him where he had been, Sebastian simply remained silent. Oh, right, of course. Where else would you be? Like not feeding your bums? Sebastian, God, you're so weird. I'll never understand you, John sighed. Sebastian grinned. Why should you understand me? Just take me as I am, that's all. The party was in full swing. John and Robert had even stopped sulking at their friend that he was driving. They were having fun, and Sebastian was just enjoying the noise around him. It wasn't until 200 that he realized. What was it about the girl that had him intrigued by the homeless Snow White and looking at him like she was trapped? It was as if she couldn't get out of trouble, but at the same time she was waiting for someone to help her, and in the first second when she looked at him, it was as if she wanted to tell him, "Help me." Except that her gaze became hunted. There was obvious fear. What was she hiding? Why was she so strange? Maybe there was something she could do to help, and Sebastian decided to find out. But he had to be careful not to frighten her. A week later, Sebastian went to the park again. He bought treats again, and he also bought wet wipes. He wanted to give them to Snow White. She is a girl and probably young. She might want to at least wipe about with the wet wipes. However, Sebastian did not see the girl when he arrived at the park. He searched with his eyes, the skinny figure in the marquee, but couldn't find her. Sebastian approached the new one, who was nestled on a bench. Listen, where's Snow White? The legless one looked at Sebastian sullenly. He wasn't in the mood today. How should I know? What am I, a mom? I got nothing better to do. How to keep track of broken chicks? Go ask Stephen. Sebastian didn't bother to ask him. Why such a shitty mood without much to do? Probably got off on the wrong foot. Sebastian mentally smiled at his joke, but it was better not to say that in front of everyone. He would take offense and the others would laugh. Sebastian handed out the food and then walked over to Stephen, who was happily drinking coffee from a paper cup. Sebastian, I can imagine that every day you can come to the stall, buy yourself the same delicious coffee, and drink it with delicious buns. You're the luckiest man in the world, I guess. Sebastian didn't mention that he didn't have to go anywhere. He has a coffee machine in his kitchen that makes coffee that tastes better than street coffee. Tell me, do you have a lot of money? Stephen asked, without malice or envy. Sebastian thought for a while before saying what to say to a man who would never understand him. Much, shortly answered Sebastian. Stephen with language and said it well. It's very good. Why? Sebastian wondered. Stephen tapped himself smartly on the knee. Well, because you can continue to help us, he answered simply. Sebastian felt a lump in his throat. These destitute and homeless people had never dreamed of anything other than not starving to death and finding a warm corner in the winter. They didn't even think they could have a different life. All that mattered to them now was that there was someone from whom they could get help, and that was it. How disgusting and touching at the same time. Stephen, where's Snow White? Stephen looked around and spread his hands. Who knows? She was here. Then she left. Then she came again. She's not with us all the time. She doesn't come every day. We don't talk to her. She can't tell us anything. We don't care about her. She's weird. Her stare is creepy, like she's crazy. And like she's too smart. You can't tell what's on her mind. No harm, no foul. Can I ask you a favor? Stephen smiled importantly. Why shouldn't I? Of course I can. You can give her these wet wipes. I brought those for her, and a bottle of water and a bun and a chocolate bar. Stephen looked carefully at the bag Sebastian held in his hand, then stared at Sebastian. What do you need that mute for? Sebastian sighed. Okay, I'll tell her. But if she refuses to take it, I won't force it on her. Sebastian thanked Stephen and went home with a heavy heart. He wished he knew what had happened to her and could do something to help her. Snow White came in late in the evening. She looked around fearfully before settling down next to the bench. It just so happened that Stephen was next to her. She quietly pulled out some sort of blanket from somewhere and took a deep breath and opened and froze. A moment later, she heard a voice and shuddered. There's a bag of stuff for you. I was supposed to give it to you. Our friend who helps us gave it to you. If you want it, don't want it. It's up to you. That's what I told him. I won't force you. Snow White heard shadows sewing in the dim lantern light. She saw Stephen toss a small package to her. She did not touch it until she heard Stephen snoring. Only then did she carefully pick up the bag and put her hand in it. She took out a bottle of water, 2 sweet rolls, and a chocolate bar. And then she pulled out something strange, some kind of tight roll. She sniffed. It smelled nice. What is it? After a while, it came to her that it was wet wipes. As soon as she realized it, she opened her eyes wide with surprise. She realized who had given these to the homeless. There was only one person helping, and she had seen him several times. But why is he showing such interest in her? What does he want from her? She should stay away from him. The girl wanted to toss the napkins aside, but hesitated. After a couple minutes, she carefully filed the plastic lid on the top with a dirty fingernail. She carefully pulled out one similar napkin and sniffed. What a delicious smell! How long had it been since she'd held one in her hands? Nothing like this. The girl carefully rubbed her face with the napkin. Then she looked at the napkin. It had turned into a gray rag. The girl hid the used napkin in her pocket and put the packet in her rags, which she was about to lie down on. In a minute she was quiet, but she was still awake for a long time, staring with her blue and piercing eyes into the sky. Sebastian continued to come every week to the park. He tried to approach the girl, but she would shy away from him. However, Sebastian realized that she had kept his napkins. Her face was much cleaner now, but she tried not to look at him. And as soon as he wanted to approach her, she immediately vanished. The summer passed. Then fall flew by just as quickly. Sebastian had more to do now. At this time of year, he supplied his charges not only with food, but also with warm clothes. The homeless were grateful to him, but Robert and John laughed at him. Once they gathered at Sebastian's house, they nursed a bottle of whiskey and sat on the couch discussing trivialities. The conversation turned again to Sebastian's reasons. John, looking at the contents of his glass, said thoughtfully, "And yet I don't understand what pleasure you get out of it. Why do you take it up with them? Don't you hate seeing them? To look at them, to say hello to them, to stand beside them, breathing the same air they breathe." Sebastian shook his head reproachfully. "John, we all breathe the same air. And them, and me, and you, and everyone. It's my own business. It's the way I want it, you know? I need it, no. But if you want to do good, do it. Who's stopping you? But can't you put the money into various charitable organizations to treat children? Yeah, take it to church after all. What exactly are you doing with them?" Robert intervened. Sebastian looked first at one friend, then at the other. He sighed and answered, choosing his words carefully. "I'll explain. Children have parents who take care of them. And if they don't have parents, they have grandparents or organizations that take care of orphans. Guardianship agencies, charitable organizations. Yes, of course, it's good, but it's just Ponzi schemes. You transfer 1,000 tens of 1,000 somewhere, and then this money goes to who knows who. And you are not even sure how much money went to the needs, and how much settled in the pocket of a rich uncle. Even animals are dealt with by shelters, actions of tracking stray dogs. And these people are of no use to anyone, you know? They live on the street, and nobody pays attention to them, doesn't see them. To other people, they're just trash, garbage. They're nothing. Nobody needs them. They have no one to turn to. They go with the flow. And if something happens to someone, no one will grieve about it. It's just so awful. But you wouldn't understand that. You know what the worst part is? They don't expect anyone to help them. They don't notice anyone either. It's like two parallel universes. These people are losing everything human because they've lost everything human, and no one will understand that. Only I understand, and I know what I mean to them is not my money, not my gifts, food. What matters most to them is that I just come to them, that I don't forget about them, that I smile at them, and talk to them for all the time I come to them. They have changed. They were indifferent and out of touch. And now they know how to communicate, to be happy, to help each other. This is worth a lot. And I see that it is not even my money that has contributed to this, but my human attitude towards them. No one makes them feel human. No one but me. There was silence. Robert and John looked at each other, holding their glasses. Sebastian sighed and took a sip of whiskey. No one broke the silence. You know, let's not go back to this topic. It's your own business. What do you think of me? But I don't want you to criticize me for helping these homeless people anymore. Do you like it or don't like it? I'm still gonna keep doing it. If you're gonna keep bringing me up, it's gonna end badly. Okay, bygones, we get it. Let's just drop the subject for good. Let's hear how Robert met his new girlfriend, John said and looked at his friend. Sebastian smiled with relief. Great. Maybe they would leave him alone for good. Winter had come, and it was the worst time for homeless people. The heat lines were fine, but sometimes it was tough. Even if someone found another place to sleep where it was warmer, every Friday they all converged on the park. They knew that Sebastian would surely come and bring them something tasty or healthy. And in the winter, this was as relevant as ever. The frost had hit hard. It was Monday. And Sebastian thought that it would be too cold for those who were still sleeping in the park. So he decided to stop by before work and drop off a couple of plaids he had bought at the mall on the first floor of his apartment building. When Sebastian found himself in the park, he didn't see anyone. Probably everyone was frightened of the night frost and scattered. So Sebastian went over to the corpses and started shoving whistles under them. And then he saw something strange. Just to his left, there was a large bundle under the pipes, and when Sebastian made a noise, the bundle twitched slightly. Sebastian thought it was the dogs who had found a warm and cozy place and had nestled there for digging through the rags. But it wasn't the dogs. From under the dirty bedspread, a white, thin hand peeked out. It stuck out and hung lifelessly. Sebastian's heart sank for some reason. He quickly sprinted over to the pile, fluttering under the pipes, and threw back the top blanket. When he saw who was in that chest of rags, he couldn't hold back a groan. Oh God, not that. There lay Snow White. She was almost white, and her lips were blue in color. She lay with her eyes closed, there was frost on her eyelashes and wood, and she didn't move. Without thinking long, Sebastian grabbed the girl in his arms and immediately ran to his car. She was almost weightless, so thin, as if she hadn't eaten anything. Sebastian didn't even bother to check if she was breathing, if she had a pulse. He just put her in the car and thought for a few seconds, where should he take her? Then he decided that the hospital doesn't treat homeless people very well nowadays. He would take her to his house and call an ambulance there. They'll come quickly if they need to. Then they'll give her the help she needs. When Sebastian brought the girl back to his apartment and put her on the couch, he was kind of scared. What if she's dead and he didn't even bother to check for a pulse? Sebastian touched her thin and cold hand. He felt for a pulse. She was alive. He breathed a sigh of relief. Then she needed to be warmed. He covered her with a thick blanket. He put a blanket on top of it. After an hour, she stirred and moaned. Sebastian immediately jumped up to her. Snow White was no longer so pale. A blush played on her cheeks. Her lips had parted. When she saw Sebastian beside her, she shook all over. Hush, hush, don't be afraid. You're at my house. I brought you here because you were freezing hard. You could have died, but I found you in time. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. When Snow White saw that she was in the apartment and not on the street, she flapped her eyes fearfully. She looked around, trying to move as far away from Sebastian as possible. She stretched her arms out in front of her and put her hands out in front of her, dividing the space between herself and Sebastian. When she realized he wasn't going to touch her, she braced herself with her arms and hushed herself, watching Sebastian intently. And Sebastian brought her hot tea and red fish sandwiches. He also put a packet of cookies, a jam jar, and scones on the tray. Maybe she would at least eat properly. Snow White looked at the tray in silence. She wouldn't eat, but her eyes sparkled when she saw so much food. Sebastian realized that she would not eat in front of him. He left to his room to go to his closet to find some clothes he could give her later. 10 minutes later, he came in. The tray was empty. Snow White had eaten everything. "You were hungry. Give me something else." Snow White was silent. Then Sebastian said, "Why don't you go take a shower and bathe? I brought you some clothes. Sure, it's just my sweatshirt and sweatpants, but it's the warmest set I have. You'll be warmer outdoors in that. Are you going to take a shower?" She didn't say anything. Then he held out his hand to her, but she recoiled from it as if it were for different. Sebastian tried to get her to talk. He asked questions and just told her stuff and tried to figure out who she was. She just sat there, barely moving. She wouldn't take her eyes off him. Sebastian lost his patience. He sighed and said to himself, "Yeah, what are you going to do?" She doesn't want anything, like she's just waiting to sneak out into the street again. As soon as he said those words, Snow White hissed. Sebastian at sea looked at her. "What? What do you want? Do you want to go outside?" He repeated, and then the girl nodded timidly. She looked at Sebastian expectantly. It was as if he was keeping her locked up. Then Sebastian realized that there was nothing more he could do to help her. He sighed, took the bag, put some food in it, put in a warm tracksuit, and handed it to Snow White. She hesitated before taking it. When she finally took the bag with shaking hands, he took out his wallet and pulled out a few 1,000 bills. There seemed to be at least 9 of them. He twisted the money into a 2, hooked it with a small paper clip, and held it out to her. She didn't take it. Then he walked over to her dirty jacket, which he hung on the table, and put the money in her pocket. "Since you're so stubborn, since you want to go back to the street, you'll need this money. You can have it even if you don't want it. If you feel bad, I'll use this money so you can have it for emergencies. You can go now. I'm not holding you any longer." Snow White immediately jumped up from David, as if someone was chasing her. Near the front door, clutching her jacket and a bag of clothes and food, she paused for a moment. She looked intently at Sebastian, and just for a few seconds her gaze went from poisoned and frightened to grateful. This surprised Sebastian very much, and he thought that he had imagined it all, because after a moment Snow White lowered her gaze. Quickly she opened the door and waved into the entryway. She quietly slammed the door shut. From that day on, Sebastian never saw Snow White again. She never showed up at the park again. He tried to find out where she was, but it was all in vain. Sebastian blamed himself for not personally taking the girl back to the park. Maybe she was lost and she didn't know where the park was. Maybe she's not oriented to the area, and he let her go alone from his apartment without even looking which way she went. What a fool. Maybe someone saw she had money and she was beaten up and left for dead in an alley somewhere. Maybe she's not alive anymore. Sebastian thought Stephen or Mason would see the girl, but they said she never came to see them again. Most likely something had really happened to her, and there was nothing more Sebastian could do. Summer came. Sebastian had new projects in the spring that took up a lot of his energy and time. He was working very hard. And when summer came, he realized that he definitely needed a vacation. He had earned too much. But Sebastian would never have gone on vacation himself if not for his friends. One day, John came to see him. Sebastian was still at work, finishing reading one contract. John started from the door. "Here's the deal. Bro, I'm tired of waiting for you to tell me you're ready to rest. I waited last year. You're still not ready for a vacation, and we never went anywhere together. Yeah, Robert and I went anyway, but it doesn't count without you. So I'm warning you right away that I'm going to take matters into my own hands and more. I've already organized everything, and if you tell me you're busy in July, I'll just come at you, bro. I've been waiting too long for you to mature." Sebastian looked at his friend mockingly. He always has only one thing on his mind: vacations, fun, girls, parties. And as soon as he's going to live beyond camping, he and his family aren't going to settle down at all. Yeah, Sebastian doesn't think about it yet either. But John is just unique. It seemed like he's been thinking about fun since he was a diaper. All right, don't get excited. I hear you. You won't leave me alone. Okay, I'll take July. I'm relying on you. I trust you completely. And if you'll arrange a vacation in the country, I'll agree to that too. Let it be as you want it to be. John smiled. No bro, no village, just the best resort. Sebastian became serious John. Only one condition: I don't want to fly abroad. John shrugged his shoulders. Yes, we're not going abroad. We have a very nice place here too. And we have 3 weeks of unforgettable vacation waiting for us. I'll give you all the details, then I'm off. I've got a lot of things to do. A week later, John told me where they were going on vacation. And frankly speaking, it was not a surprise. For 3 whole weeks they hang out in Sochi. Can't say Sebastian was thrilled. It was too crowded, too flashy. John chose a fancy hotel. He rented 3 rooms for Duma, Sebastian, and himself. And he was looking forward to a wonderful vacation. Personally, he planned to spend fun days in the evening with friends, and at night he was going to get acquainted with girls and bring them to his room. And preferably a different one every day. Robert's dream was more down to earth. He wanted to meet someone and spend nights with the same partner. Sebastian, on the other hand, just wanted to relax. He wanted to sleep, swim, sunbathe, and just relax. And he didn't care about his friends' plans. Robert and John didn't depend on him in any way. They just needed them all to come to the same place together on vacation. It seemed to them that it brought them closer together. It cemented their friendship. But in reality, each of them spent their time accordingly to their own preferences. And it didn't bother anyone. Until a few years ago, John kept trying to introduce him to someone. He even paid one beauty to wait for Sebastian naked in his room. But Sebastian wasn't impressed. He gave the girl his robe and escorted her out of the room. So John simply stopped forcing his friend to do anything. They arrived in Sochi and immediately settled in their rooms. I must say that when Sebastian went out on the balcony, he even held his breath for a second. His balcony, like the balconies of his friends, was located on the seaside. Sebastian, standing on the 12th floor, marveled at the beauty surrounding him. It was marvelous. Sebastian realized that the sunset would be on this side, and an incredibly beautiful sight awaited him in the evening. In the afternoon, they took a swim in the pool. Sebastian went to the beach and took a dip in the sea as well. His friends didn't want to. They stayed by the pool to look for victims. In the evening, they went about their business. Robert and John went to the bar to pick up lonely women, and Sebastian decided to walk around town. It had been a long time since Sebastian had been on vacation. His whole life was centered on work and helping the underprivileged, and now he was doing just that. He looked with his eyes for someone to ask for alms. But there was no such thing in Sochi. Here they kept order. This kind of thing would not be tolerated here. Sebastian reached some park. There were many people in the park, all walking around, eating ice cream, talking and laughing, music blaring here and there. And Sebastian walked relaxedly around the park, looking around. There was an artificial pond up ahead, with several bridges across it. Sebastian walked onto one of them. He reached the middle, leaned against the handrail, and looked around. There was another bridge nearby. It ran parallel to the one Sebastian was standing on. Sebastian noticed that a girl was standing on that bridge in exactly the same pose as him. Sebastian thought it was funny, and he smiled. And then the girl raised her head, and the smile disappeared from his lips. It was a couple of seconds. Sebastian scrutinized the girl and then shouted, "Snow White." The girl jerked from the blow and looked around, and then she saw Sebastian. It was clear that she recognized him immediately. Sebastian waved at her, but she immediately took off. Sebastian, trying not to lose sight of her, immediately ran off the bridge and raced after her. What is she doing here? How did she get here? Sebastian immediately noticed that she was dressed normally now, and her hair was clean. She's not chewing anymore, that much is obvious. but at least not like she used to, that's for sure. He'd even say she looked different, and he'd think he'd labeled himself. If she hadn't acted like that, if she hadn't reacted to his response in any way, or at least hadn't twitched as much, he would have thought he'd shit himself. But Snow White was startled when she heard her nickname. She was scared, ready to run. She looked the same as she had been before. Sebastian ran after her, trying to skip between people. Snow White was much better at it because she was small and thin. Sebastian, on the other hand, bumped into people a couple times who even tried to stop him. "Hey man, you pushed my girlfriend. I'm gonna punch you in the face." Sebastian heard someone's rough voice. I'm sorry. I'm going after the girl." "Excuse me, please." He chased her for a long time, but finally he got lucky. He caught up with her and grabbed her hand. She immediately stopped and froze, looking down. She shook and large tears ran down her cheeks. "God, what are you so afraid of? Snow White, I won't lay a finger on you. Calm down. You should know by now that I'm coming to you with the best of intentions. There have been plenty of times when I could have taken advantage of you, but I don't need to. You need to calm down." Snow White stopped shaking but didn't look up. Sebastian held her hand just below the elbow. It was so fragile, he was afraid to break its bones with his hands. "Let's go sit on the bench. You need to calm down, and it's still pretty crowded in here. If you're afraid of me, come on, let's go sit down." He pulled the girl with him, and Snow White followed him obediently, but she moved as if she were a robot. Sebastian didn't want to scare her, but he would by all means. He wanted to find out why she was acting this way and if she was okay. They sat down on the bench. Snow White sat with her back straight. She tucked her hands under her legs. Her gaze was frozen. For some reason, her posture brought back some vague memories for Sebastian. It seemed to him that the pose spoke of true despair. He had been desperate once, too, when his parents died. When his grandmother was taken to the hospital when she died there. Apparently, that's when he made the decision to help those who are in true despair, who don't believe you can almost always find a way out. "What's your name?" Sebastian asked. The girl looked down in silence. "How did you get here? How long have you been here? Where do you live?" Sebastian asked her. Snow White remained silent. Sebastian scrutinized her. He realized why she had put her palms under her feet, so that he could not see how her fingers trembled with excitement and fear. Or maybe also so he wouldn't touch her. "You don't want to talk to me? Well, I'm going to call you Snow White. And since you don't want me to know your name? Oh man, I totally forgot." And then Sebastian remembered that she can't talk. She's mute. How stupid. He looks so stupid. She probably thinks he's crazy. Sebastian pulled out his cell phone and opened the notes. He handed the cell phone to her with the words, "You can write your name. You can write anything you want. That way we can chat with you about anything." Snow White didn't even move. She just started breathing more often. Sebastian realized that she was going to continue to ignore him. But he wasn't going to give up either. "You know, I've often thought about you. You left with the money. And I really regretted letting you go. When I stopped seeing you, I thought something had happened to you, and I was afraid it was my fault you were in trouble. How I could let you go so rashly, I don't understand. But when I saw you now, I was so happy. I was afraid you were dead, and here you are. And you look so alive. I'm so glad I saw you." He was silent, waiting for some reaction to his words. When he didn't, he sighed and looked forward. Snow White was looking at him with interest. Sebastian sighed once more and said quietly without looking at her, "Stephen told me you weren't yourself. I didn't believe him. You know, I always try to believe in the best. The worst can happen to us at any moment. I believed that I could get through to you, and that you'd tell me what was wrong and that I could help you, no matter what kind of trouble you were in. I just thought you had that look in your eye that made me think you needed help. I really need help, and I thought I did. I thought." He stopped talking. His gaze froze. He looked ahead. There was a boy sitting on a bench. He was holding a balloon in his hand. He was smiling happily, pulling the balloon by the string and watching it try to float upwards. The boy looked about 6 years old, no more. And he was so happy. Sebastian remembered himself at that age. His childhood had ended at that age, because his parents had died, and he had never smiled so happily and carefree again. He was still a child, but he didn't think of himself as such. And when his grandmother died, even the others noticed that he didn't even look like a child anymore. And now he looked at that boy and felt that he just wanted to hug that boy so badly, to hug and press himself against him so hard that a drop of happiness would be transmitted through this boy to him, so that he would be a little bit happy too. While he was looking at the boy, Snow White was looking at him. Her armor cracked, and she was surprised to find that she noticed pain and sadness in this man's eyes. What was wrong with him? And why did he keep following her around? Sebastian, meanwhile, continued to speak. I once wished I had someone close to me, but it was impossible. I lost everyone. And then at one point, I had an epiphany. Maybe it's all about me. Maybe I'm the reason I lost everyone. Maybe I'm not worthy to be taken care of by anyone, and that's why God took them all away from me. I lived with that thought for a long time, for a very long time, and then I convinced myself that I was wrong. I only have 2 best friends and no one else. I haven't let anyone else get close to me like that. He stopped talking. Snow White kept looking at him. Then he turned to her. The girl had time to lower her gaze, and Sebastian did not notice that she was looking at him. Sebastian looked at her face carefully and sighed disappointedly. Why am I telling you all this? Stephen was right. You're out of your mind, and you don't know what you're being told. I don't know how you got to Soki, where you live and what you eat, but you're clearly not yourself. Or maybe you just feel like you can't get close to me. Yeah, that's right. I'm the dangerous type. You can't even talk to me. I can get you in trouble just by looking at you. I get it. I've been helping the homeless for years. I truly care about everyone who gets in trouble. I do not refuse to help any person who comes to me. I am aware of the plight of each and every one of the employees at my firm, and I try to prove to myself that I am not bad or dangerous. Because the boy inside me is still afraid. So there you go. Sebastian said the last sentences with such bitterness that Snow White raised her eyebrows in surprise. When Sebastian stopped talking, he closed his eyes. He realized he had overreacted. This strange girl wasn't to blame for his problems, and he was trying to shift some of his discomfort onto her. It's stupid. The whole thing is stupid. If this strange, special one doesn't want to communicate with him, then he needs to accept that he's lost. Need to leave her alone and forget she exists. What good is knocking on closed doors if no one on the other side will open any? All right, I won't bother you again. I had many questions, and none of them were answered. They remain, but I won't bother you again. If you don't want me to, then so be it. I'm sorry I hurt you. Anyway, good luck to you, Snow White. Whoever you are and whatever you've got going on, you just believe there's always a way out. Only death leaves you no choice. And everything else, you can accept it and find a way out. Goodbye, Snow White. Sebastian stood up, put his hands in his pockets, and slowly walked away. Adriana, my name is Adriana. He heard a beautiful voice behind him. Sebastian stopped abruptly and slowly turned to look at Snow White. He frowned, looking at her, because she was looking him straight in the eyes. My name is Adriana, and I am not mute, the girl repeated. Now Sebastian was convinced it was really her speaking. Jesus, for so long everyone has been convinced that you're mute beyond belief. How could you pretend for so long? Didn't anyone notice? The girl shook her head. I had my reasons, good reasons. And yes, no one noticed. Sebastian walked back slowly. He sat down on the bench again, and he didn't take his eyes off her face. When she spoke, she looked completely different. You really did look like someone who couldn't speak. Adriana sighed and looked away. Mine. My grandmother was a deaf-mute. She had a stroke and lost her hearing and speech. I lived with her for a while until she died, so I just acted like she acted. That's why I was good at it. Where are your parents? What happened to you anyway? Why are you acting like this? Asked Sebastian. Adriana, all but back her back, was suddenly offended, and she sighed sorrowfully. After being silent for a few minutes, she looked intently at Sebastian, and her gaze gave him goosebumps. Her gaze pinned him in place as if she were a witch. And even if he wanted to, he couldn't move. I've had a lot of bad things happen in my life. I thought you were a bad person, that you were a plant. But now I realize you're not who I thought you were. Who overheard? I don't understand, Sebastian said. I'll tell you everything. I'll answer all your questions, any questions you have. Just promise me I can trust you. Promise that I won't regret telling you everything about you. Sebastian nodded, not even hesitating. Of course you can trust me. I swear I won't do anything bad to you. I don't know who you think I am, but I'm certainly not. I'm me. Nothing more. Adriana nodded contentedly. Her mouth felt dry, and she pursed her lips. Sebastian immediately jumped up. Are you thirsty? I'll buy you some water now. Right now, just don't run anywhere. Okay, promise me you'll stay put. Adriana nodded. She wasn't going to run away anymore. She was sick of doing it. She was dead tired of what her life had become, if you could call it that. She needed to gather her strength and stop to look back. Sebastian found water nearby at an ice cream stand. He looked back every few seconds, watching to see if Adriana had run away from him. Had she tricked him? But Adriana sat still and watched the guy. After a couple minutes, he brought mineral water and sweet sodas. Also sweet donuts in a bag. Maybe you're hungry, he said embarrassedly. Adriana took the water and the bag of kidneys from his hands and thanked him. She drank the water, then froze. Sebastian waited patiently for her to start her own story, but she remained silent and silent. Adriana, you seem to be thinking, Sebastian said quietly. Adriana sighed. It was time to face the past, at least in her thoughts. She was ready for that. Adriana was also an orphan. Her parents had died early. She was only 7 years old. The year before her parents died, her grandmother had gotten into trouble, and her gentle and loving grandmother became almost a vegetable. Her parents moved her in with them, and Adriana watched her grandmother behave strangely every day. She was on her own, she didn't notice anyone, and she wanted to be ignored. When her parents were gone, it was clear that Adriana could not stay with her sick grandmother. No one would appoint the old woman as her guardian either. She couldn't do anything, she could barely even attend to herself. So the grandmother was sent to a special home where such sick and infirm people live. Adriana was taken to an orphanage. It must be said that Adriana resisted it very much. She shouted that she could take care of her grandmother herself and begged not to hide her in the orphanage. But the guardianship authorities gave clear instructions. The girl should be in the orphanage and looked after. The girl lived in the orphanage until she was 18. She was never adopted. She was a very beautiful child, but there was such sadness and sorrow in her eyes that it repelled any potential parent. Maybe it was her defensive reaction, or maybe she really didn't want another family. No one knew that. At the age of 18, Adriana met William. This burly brunette with dark eyes won her over at first sight. She just lost her head when she saw him. She'd never really dated anyone before, and then she met a man who immediately pinned her against the wall and kissed her passionately. His strength was intimidating, but so monarchic he wanted to conquer, to win her over. But he didn't have to do anything for that, because Adriana was ready to crawl to him on her knees herself. A month after meeting him, she had already married him. And another month later, she finds out he's a gangster. He's a criminal mastermind. And very many people were well aware of that. She married a man who had a lot of weight in the criminal world. But she thought so. She thought it couldn't get any worse. For a whole month after the wedding, she had been bathed in his attention and love, and she felt as if she had grown wings behind her back. He was her first man, and she was ready to scream at the world with happiness. But after the truth was revealed, Adriana felt her love evaporate, as if it wasn't love at all, but just some kind of mental confusion. She realized that she didn't want to be with this man and had to leave him as soon as possible. She only lasted a month. She went to him and told him that she wanted to leave William and that she was going to file for divorce. She had expected anything but calm. Her husband gave her a slightly disdainful look and said softly, "That will never happen. You are my wife, and I want you with me always. As long as I want that, you will be by my side. If I cross over, then I'll decide what to do with you." Maybe I'll let you go. Now, get out of my office, honey, and go do your lady stuff. If you need to go anywhere from now on, tell Liam or Camille. They'll always be there for you so you don't do anything stupid. He said it very gently, but Adriana could sense the danger in his voice. She had started a war, and now it was up to her to decide what would happen next. If she accepted her position, everything would be fine. But if she decided to insist on her own, then her life was in danger, that's for sure. Adriana realized that now nothing will be as before and that she is now almost a hostage. Her friends, her husband's helpers, hardly left her unattended. They were willing to shower with her if they could. Yeah, they wouldn't mind doing something useful. Keeping an eye on William's rebellious wife and admiring her delightful naked body. Adriana could not tolerate it for long, and after a while she again had a serious conversation with her husband. Only this time he was no longer so amiable, and his appearance and behavior frightened Adriana. He was like a wild beast that had gotten off the chain. And the girl could not understand why she had fallen so in love with this man just a few months ago. William said that he would not let her go, and she would regret it if she decided to leave him. He would make her feel like a complete nonentity. But Adriana was not afraid of that. She had long felt like nothing since she was a child. Overjoyed that he no longer had her in his care, she left him. She thought that would be the end of it, but she was sorely mistaken. The worst thing happened next. Would she have left him if she had known what was in store for her next? Adriana didn't. Her fate was too unpleasant both ways. He had set her up. She didn't know how he had done it. But after a while, after she left, he started intimidating her again. He said she had proof that she was involved in some illegal business, and that she couldn't get away with it. And if she didn't go back to him, if she wasn't nice to him again, if she filed for divorce, he would make sure she went to jail. Adriana didn't believe he was capable of that. Besides, she knew for a fact that she had done nothing so illegal or criminal. But she was wrong. He was capable of anything, and he was willing to have his wife in jail. He didn't care about that. He set her up, tampered with some evidence, and Adriana couldn't defend herself. Nobody listened to her. No one cared about her testimony. William made sure no one listened to her. Everyone thought they caught a big fish. It's a big deal to catch the wife of a big shot. Now his arrest was imminent, and no one could have guessed that her arrest was a setup, a ploy to humiliate Babenko's equal. Before Adriana knew it, she was behind bars. She had lived with William for exactly 6 months, and those 6 months seemed to her like a whole 10 years. She was so happy and unhappy at the same time, and she wished this nightmare would end soon. But it didn't end, it just started. She served almost 3 years in prison, and those were years of horror. She was totally unprepared for something like this in her life. Of course, no one probably prepares for doing time. But she was so shattered and destroyed mentally that when she was suddenly released, she was even afraid to go outside the gate. She was on her knees begging to be allowed to stay in prison. She almost kissed her feet when she begged not to be sent away. She was willing to do any job, even the most humiliating. But no one listened to her. There were laws and they had to be obeyed. She was set free, so she had to go, and Adriana did. Except she didn't go to her husband yet. She had nothing and no one. But she decided she'd rather wander than go back to William. That evil and cruel man had destroyed her life, trampled her dreams and aspirations. She never wanted to see him again. She was very surprised that he wasn't waiting for her outside the prison. She had expected him to be waiting for her at the gate, his loyal Camille friends, but no one was waiting for her. With the money she had, she bought a train ticket, and that same evening, she left the city she hated. And she began to wander the streets, until she met Sebastian. She'd been homeless for about 6 months. That's the story. Adriana stopped talking. Sebastian listened to her with his mouth open. He could not get used to the idea that the girl, whom everyone thought was sick and mute, could express her thoughts so intelligently, and that she had such a beautiful voice. And how much grief had she suffered? It's a nightmare. How many ordeals did she have to endure? I can see why she looked so frightened, battered, and hunted. Was it possible to behave differently in such a situation? How did you end up in Sochi? Sebastian asked. Adriana blushed slightly. Your money. Thank you for your help. I didn't thank you then. I had already realized that sleeping on the street was unacceptable for me. I bought a ticket to Sochi and left the same night. Your soup came in handy. I changed my clothes at the train station, washed up. I bought myself a bag, a set of underwear, and another suit. Only a woman's. And I left. I found myself a room. A grandmother on the outskirts of town rented out a room. It's very profitable because I pay very little. And then I got a job. I only wash dishes in a restaurant and work as a cleaner. But I have enough for rent and some food. I think that's enough for me. I can go on living like this. As long as William doesn't find me. I don't want him to find me. That's just it. What? Adriana frowned and answered thoughtfully. It's all about his children. They're William's children. He introduced them to me when I married him. Turns out he was already married before me. His wife was murdered and the kids stayed with him, but he doesn't really need them. And the kids were so great. They were nothing like their father. I bonded with them. They knew I was going to leave him, and they cried so hard. They loved me and wanted me to take them with me then. But naturally, I couldn't do that. They're about 9 years old now, I guess. I think about them all the time. What are they doing? Are they doing well? Sebastian looked at Adriana. She's an incredible girl, stood up to her husband, a gangster. Lived on the streets, only to never go back to him again. And she spoke so reverently about his children, who were nothing to her. It was so amazing. Sebastian felt a kind of excitement. Never in his life had he ever wanted to help a person as much as he did now. He wanted to help her so that she would never be afraid of anyone ever again, and to look people in the eye without fear and not pretend she's mute, just so no one would pay attention to her. He wanted to do everything for her. He told her all this. He talked to her, long persuaded her, told her, explained. She shook her head negatively at first. I didn't tell you all this so that you would help me. I'm fine with it. I just realized that you deserve to know the truth and that you deserve me to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You really helped me. I'm not homeless anymore, so to speak, but I don't want to change anything. I just can't. Adriana, think about the fact that his kids aren't going to grow up so happy. They don't have someone to love and care for them. If your husband doesn't want them, maybe we can find someone who does. Let's give it a try. Let's find out that with William, you're not alone anymore. I'll help you and I'll set it up. You don't even have to do anything. I'll do it myself. I also want to make him pay for hurting you. Together we can make sure he never hurts anyone else again. Maybe we won't even have to do anything. We'll just find out everything. Adriana hesitated for a long time. But in the end, Sebastian talked her into it. She just couldn't resist anymore. She was afraid to admit even to herself that she liked him. Back when he'd come to the park and looked at her so strangely. Even back when he'd handed her the wet wipes, then she'd started to feel something strange about him. And after he had saved her from frostbite, she realized that she had never met such kind and helpful people. And now, when she told him everything, she felt so good, as if she had been born again. She realized that she wanted to be with him at least a little longer. If she refused, he would leave, and they would never meet again. And if she said yes, she'd go with him. That means they'll be in touch for a while. Wouldn't that be nice? Sebastian called a cab, and they drove to where Adriana lived. She told the landlady she was leaving. Then Sebastian took her to the mall. They spent 3 hours getting the girl properly dressed. Adriana was shocked that he was spending so much on her. After all, they were strangers to each other, but she couldn't resist. She was so tired of being alone, running away from everything, hiding from everyone. She wanted to feel safe for a little while. Then Sebastian drove her to the hotel. When she walked into his room, she gasped. She had never been in such a fancy place before. Yes, William wasn't P-Tane either. But he had never once taken her anywhere. He hadn't bought her a single piece of jewelry. She was just a thing to him. An hour after they got there, Sebastian's friends showed up. Look, where do you get off? We couldn't get a hold of you at 12 o'clock. And do something, please. And then John saw Adriana, who in a Sebastian robe and with wet hair was sitting on the couch. She looked at Sebastian's friends with embarrassment. Robert opened his mouth in amazement. Wow, me, we didn't know you weren't alone. You found yourself a girlfriend. Congratulations. When did you get here? We just got here, said John with an approving look at Adriana's naked legs. Friends, this is Adriana. She's a very good, long-time acquaintance of mine. She needs my help and she's going to live with me for now. Eugio's coming to live with you. I'm just shocked, Dean. John was surprised. Sebastian looked at Adriana. These are my best friends. They can be very decent and nasty, but I trust them. May I say? Adriana shrugged her shoulders and jerked her head uncertainly. Then Sebastian told John and Dimma everything. They were amazed. So that's how Snow White you are. Yes, we know about you. Sebastian told you. You must have been on his mind back then. He was worried about you. Of course I'd be worried too. John clicked his tongue approvingly. John didn't push it. Sebastian said menacingly. Oh, Culk, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry you had to go through all that. Your husband's a real asshole. He should have his legs ripped off for what he did. All right, let's get some rest, and then we'll take care of the rest of the business. 3 weeks flew by like a blink of an eye. Sebastian had never had such a good vacation. And that's because Adriana was with him. All this time they talked as friends, but still feeling something more for each other. It wasn't until the last day of their vacation that they both couldn't stand it. And when they slept together, Sebastian felt like he had found the person he was looking for. He had never felt so good. When they got home, Adriana naturally went to Sebastian's place, and he now had a problem to solve with William. Sebastian hired a private investigator whom he paid fabulous money to go to another city and investigate there. He needed to find out what was going on with William now. What's he up to? How he could be nailed and what happened to his children. Next, he was going to get Adriana and William a divorce. A week later, the private investigator returned, and he had some wonderful news. Turns out William went to prison 6 months ago. He'd gotten caught doing something illegal and couldn't get away with it. He was locked up, and the kids were taken away to an orphanage. 4 months after he went to prison, he was murdered. He was killed in prison, but nobody could figure out how it happened. In the end, it was treated as an accident. And then incredible things happened. It turned out that Adriana was still legally married to William. It was a surprise to everyone, especially William's friends, Camille and Liam. They had hoped that they could make sure that all of William's inheritance was left to them. And here was such meanness on the part of their friend. They were terribly angry that William hadn't thought of this beforehand. They began to look for Adriana, knowing she was in prison. But to their horror, they didn't find her. It turns out she had gotten out a long time ago and disappeared. She had simply gone missing, and no one had ever seen her. And she never showed up anywhere. That was a problem. But Liam and Camille didn't give up. They kept looking for her. The children remained in the orphanage, and the detective said there were already applicants to adopt them. When Adriana heard this, she covered her mouth with her hand and sobbed. Oh my God, they're going to be adopted. Sebastian looked at his girlfriend carefully and asked, "Don't you want them to be taken away?" Adriana didn't answer for a long time and then finally said firmly, "No, I don't want them to be adopted because I want to adopt them myself. That's what I thought." Sebastian said quietly. He sighed, thanked the detective, and paid him off. When the detective left, Sebastian picked up his cell phone and started dialing a number. Before he started talking, he said, "Adriana, then get ready. We are going to go there so that you will inherit the inheritance and take the children. And we need the best lawyer so that there won't be any problem or snag." When Adriana showed up, Liam and Camille almost went numb. Frankly, they thought the girl had just died. And they were going to go to court to get all of William's assets into their hands. The kids weren't a problem for them. They were going to go on a crime to prove they weren't children at all. But Adriana showed up and ruined all their plans. "You're not getting anything. You bitch, you don't deserve this. You married him, lived with him for 6 months. And now you want everything to go to you? We won't let that happen. And who did you bring with you, your lover? So get out of here with him," they shouted. They probably would have strangled her with their own hands if Sebastian had not been present. To all their insults, Sebastian calmly replied, "You all set her up. She was in jail because of you and her husband. And now you think she deserves nothing. She will get what is rightfully hers, and there is nothing you can do about it." Of course, the two idiots couldn't do anything, and Adriana legally inherited. And then they got busy with the children. When Adriana went to the head of the orphanage and explained the situation to her, the woman was overjoyed. "I am so glad that these children turned out to be of use to you. I'm truly sorry. They're so miserable and battered, and no one wants to take the two of them. They have to be separated, and I hate to separate them. They need each other so much." When Liam and Camille saw Adriana, they threw themselves around her neck. They recognized her immediately. They hugged her so tightly that Adriana could barely stand on her feet. "Daddy died quietly," Liam said. "I know," Adriana replied, almost crying. "Have you come to take us away?" "Even more quietly," said Camille, bumping her neck. Adriana answered quietly, "If you don't mind, I'd like to be your mom." Of course, the children didn't mind. They wished it as much as Adriana did. After much paperwork, it was decided that the children could only be adopted if Adriana was legally married. That's when Sebastian came to the rescue again. He suggested that they get married. "Thank you for your help. I don't know how else to get them to give them to me. As soon as it's done, you can file for divorce. And I won't make you do anything against your will," said Sebastian Adriana. "What are you talking about? What are you forcing me to do against my will?" "Well, marry me," the girl whispered, confused. Sebastian smiled and took her hand. "You fool. What makes you think I'm against my will? I want to marry you. I really want you to be my wife. I've found the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with, and it's not because of the children or the circumstances. It's you. I love you, and I want to be your husband." Adriana was taken aback. She hadn't expected this wonderful man to love her. Yes, they had been close all this time. Yes, she felt something going on between them, but she didn't expect him to love her. "So you agree, Snow?" "Yes, yes, I agree," shouted Adriana and hugged Sebastian tightly around the neck. Now she knew that she had nothing more to fear. Now she knew she would be happy. Happy with her lover who would soon be her husband, and with the children who would soon be her and Sebastian's children when they picked them up from the orphanage. That's the truest happiness. And you don't need anything else.